So, welcome everyone then to the second course on balancing the Sentinel stars. And the emphasis on this session is really around the pelvis. But before we get to that, I thought it'd be really useful to recap a bit, just summarize the information from the first session, which was around how we balance the feet. And also we could take that work we did last week a little bit further. And before we move on to the pelvis area. So just as a very quick summary from last week, then balancing the 7 stars, the Sentinel stars, what's that about? Well, it's all about really refining to a very high level our idea of alignment and balance and structure. And it's not just that this is a means to an end. Sorry, it's not just that this is an end in itself, it's actually a means to an end. And the means to an end is that it actually accelerates our development of being able to perceive internal processes, internal parts of the body, so-called Neigong or Neigung. So that's the overall rationale for doing that. We introduced a number of ideas last week, and the first one was I called stars. So the stars are particular areas of the body which are very rich in proprioceptors. So these are the sensors of the body which can give you lots of feedback. So they're continually giving you a lot of feedback at a subconscious level. So the process we're trying to do is to make some of this information more conscious so that we can refine consciously our alignment and balance and structure. So those stars, those areas which are rich in proprioceptors, tend to be in the myofascia, and that's the structure which wraps all the muscles, and the fascia wraps the organs in the body as well. And they tend to be near the origins or insertions of muscles, and they tend to be around the myofascia in that area. So that's a rough guide as to what the stars are and where they are in the body. And the reason they're quite interesting is because they can give us a lot of detailed information about the areas near there, the gates, as I call them. So the gates is a term used really in Taoist ideas, that they're really associated with joints or nearby joints. And by adjusting the quality of those joints, then the energy and the rate and the strength with which energy can move through the body becomes increased and becomes amplified. So we work with the stars in order to consciously adjust the gates of the body, and as a consequence of that, our perception of the energy centers and direct perception of the energy centers starts to develop. So this is really a super fast way of developing internal experience. So hopefully that was kind of the theory behind it, and that's okay. So what we did last week is we concentrated on the stars around the feet, and we introduced some constellations. So the stars of the feet were the bubbling well areas, and it was also the area by where the Achilles tendon, basically, where it fits, where the tendon goes into the ankle area. So what we're aiming to do there was to balance the stars around the feet. And we'll repeat that exercise in a few moments, and we'll take it a little further also. But what I thought would be really nice to do before that was to just do an arriving meditation, and we'll revisit the anchoring the breath meditation, which we introduced last week. So this is where and I'll talk us through it and guide you through it, but this is where you start to breathe in through the nose and follow it down to the perineum. And then when it reaches the perineum, you gently lift that with the slightest aspect of mind. So we'll repeat that, and then we'll add a little bit to it. So what I'd like you to do is to sit in a comfortable chair which supports you quite well. So you're looking for the sitting bones to be clearly in contact with the chair that you're sitting on. And ideally, your thighs should be parallel, or the knees should be slightly low below the hip joints. And what we do is we start to identify that point above the top of the back of the head. And we create that line from that point above the top of the back of the head, through the top of the skull, down through just in front of the spine, down through the body to the perineum. So let's spend just a few moments establishing that line. And remember, it's the feeling of being suspended from that point of the back of the head, top of the back of the head, rather than being lifted. So you're looking for that feeling of suspension. That starts to create the space within the body. And that suspension is, it feels like your skeletal structure is suspended, which then feels like all the soft aspects of the body can start to relax downwards away from that skeletal structure. So this is what I call the fundamental separation of the yin and the yang. So looking to establish that line from the point above the head down to the perineum. And then starting to breathe through the nose. Follow the breath as it goes through the nose, noticing the internal quality of the nose, up to the bridge of the nose and out. And then as we breathe in, we follow the breath successively deeper down through to the mouth, down into the lungs. And you breathe out. And the next time you breathe in, you follow the breath as it goes down through to the bottom of the lungs, down through the diaphragm, and down, starts to go down towards the lower abdomen. And you breathe out. Breathing in now, all the way down through the body, until your breath can touch the perineum. And as it touches the perineum this time, just have that feeling of a slight lifting before you breathe out. And then just work with that, breathing in, long, slow breath in and a long, slow breath out. Just gently lifting the perineum as the breath touches that point. And we just do that for a few minutes. If your mind starts to wander, just bring it back to the image that we're working with in the process of long inhalation long exhalation, coordinated with the slight rising of the perineum. Gently remember the exercise, the feeling. Remember any adjustments that the body has naturally started to do. Any changes that you've noticed. Just connect with those before you leave the exercise. Okay. So it's okay if if you discover that the mind is actually quite turbulent. Really what we do is just notice that and just keep going back to the exercise. So that's part of the process of settling and arriving. So we'll add a little bit to that meditation as we go along. So what we'll do now is just revisit the foot constellation, just recap on that. And then I'd like to use that opportunity to introduce the first way in which we use our mind in this process. So there are three important ways in which we use the mind when we're balancing the Sentinel stars. And we'll use the foot exercise to introduce the first way in which we use our mind. So let's stand up and we'll do a little standing posture meditation. So remember, if we put our feet together, pivot out at the heels, and then pivot out at the toes such that the outside of the feet are parallel. We're looking for that sort of distance between the left and the right foot. That's good. And then start to bring your awareness down to the soles of the feet, feeling the contact of the soles of the feet with the earth. And now in particular, identify those areas which we introduced last week. The bubbling well points in the first third of the foot. And then the points really round the Achilles tendon as that starts to insert into the ankle area, both on the medial side and the lateral side. The inside and the outside. So we'll just spend, like we did last week, we'll spend a bit of time just finding those points, really finding those, that quality of continual adjustment, the sort of sparkling, the twinkling of the stars. Remember to keep suspended from that point above the top of the head. That will give this space through the body. Also allow the soft aspects of the body to relax downwards towards the feet. Noticing if any of those stars is more active than the others. Looking to balance the processing, the activity of those stars. So the activity in the bubbling well area, the activity in the heel area, the ankle area. And then last week we introduced a constellation, they're like lines of communication or comparison. We had the idea that the stars were the corners of a square or rectangle, and also the cross diagonals were communicating. So the bubbling well of the left foot communicated with the ankle area of the right foot, and the bubbling well of the right foot through to the ankle area of the left foot. So just use that image, allow those stars to communicate and balance their processing across the feet. You may notice differences between the right foot and the left foot. That's fine. We just allow the stars to communicate, almost like they're allowed to rebalance themselves and negotiate themselves and the process of change, the process of interaction. And I'll make the point that if at any point the standing postures become too difficult or too painful, then it's fine to sit down, but maintaining that feeling as if you were standing. So this balancing process can be done sitting down. It's more beneficial standing up, but we can do it sitting down as well. And so we can continue the process that way. I'll purposely keep the meditation short to between, say, 3 and 5 minutes, but it could be that if there's a particular weakness or imbalance, that might be difficult for you anyway. Okay, now once we've got some stability with this exercise, we add something else. And this is the first way we use the mind. And it's the idea of continual release or continual relaxation. So whatever we do, it doesn't change or finish, it keeps on going. So in this case, I often say about feels like the ground underneath the feet is continually softening. We could try a different image as a different way in. If you remember stepping into a lift or an elevator at some point and the elevator going down, that feeling of continually release as the elevator goes down. Recreate that feeling in the feet, that the ground underneath is almost like you're in an elevator continually going down. So the feet are continually going down. So we're looking for that never-ending process of continual release. Once you have the feeling, then let go of the image and relate directly to the feeling. So this is an important aspect, and the second way in which we use the mind in this system. And I'll talk a little bit further about that later. So this idea of continual release. Balancing the stars, allowing them to communicate, and continual release. And without losing that feeling, let's just take that to the sitting position and continue for a few moments more in the sitting position. Just to explore that sensation. A little bit more difficult now, I think, because the weight isn't activating the stars so clearly, but you can still allow them to have some weight and to still communicate, and still have the feeling of continual release into the earth. Okay, and then gradually let go of that, and I'll just pause there as you come out of that meditation, and feel free to, if you wish to share anything from that experience, or if there's anything you want to say, then there's an opportunity to do so. Any questions or observations?
Continuing the exercise sitting down, it kind of carried on. It kind of works from being in the way that, having done it for a long time standing up, it kind of sitting down as well. Whereas before, just sitting down felt quite static, but doing it that way around was quite good.
Yeah, I'm sorry, John, the audio is not brilliant, so I'm not really catching what you're saying.
So doing the standing up exercise and then doing it sitting down,
Yeah,
it carried on, whereas just starting off sitting down, it wasn't so good.
Yeah. Yes, I think it's easier to initiate it standing up, and I think it's a stronger feeling standing up. Yeah.
I found exactly the same thing, John. It was at first I was sort of when I sat after the standing, I was sort of looking for the sensation in the feet and noticing that it was lighter, but it actually didn't make any difference to the connection.
Good, thank you. Okay, so what we could do now is the very first beginning movements of the Tai Chi form, actually using that process. So let me just demonstrate. So we're starting our form with our heels together, but that doesn't matter. The stars are still there in the feet, and they can use the communication, the constellation between them to refine our understanding of balance and alignment in that beginning position. And then as we begin to continually relax through the feet, we allow our body to follow that relaxation. And then into the right foot, you notice as well that there's more pressure in the right foot, that those two stars, as your weight is going down, as you're drawn into that leg, explore how the stars within the right foot are communicating. But they're not lost. The connection with the left foot isn't lost. So even in transition and the initial placing of the foot, before the weight's gone into that left leg, the stars are still there and they're still communicating. Such that when you soften under the left foot and draw the weight into the left foot, the stars are still communicating, even as your waist is turned. And then as you come back to square the front, then the stars communicate to rebalance. So you use that process to gain extra information at the beginning, to check your posture and alignment and structure at the beginning, the start of the form, as you begin to move into the first posture, and then it doesn't break in transition. You're still using that communication between those parts of the foot. And then even as your waist is turning, you're still using that communication, and you're still using that communication. So have a go just at doing that, just the very simplest parts of the form, spending your time setting up the structure and making sure that that structure doesn't break, that constellation doesn't break as you do the form. So I won't talk through it because you have all the elements of what we need to do. The setting up of the constellation, that feeling of continually relaxing and drawing down into the earth. Those are all the elements you need in order to use this.
Sorry, Kim, before we start, so what we're standing and then we're stepping, or?
Yeah, you do your pre-flight checks for the Tai Chi form.
And so we're going into the form,
yeah. Yeah, using alignment and balance as informed by the constellation, and then just go into the form. So just do it in your own time, really, John. Do it a few times. And then come to a rest when you've finished. So how was that for everybody?
I found that as I sank down, everything kind of sank down so deeply, it was really hard to pick my left foot up. I could bend the knee and my toes are off, my heel is off the floor, but then actually picking it up seemed really hard because everything was kind of like dropped through the floor. Weird.
Interesting.
It's I'm becoming more aware of the ankle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, I immediately become aware how much more improvement there is I could make in a balance and alignment, not just in standing, but how much, if I'm not careful, it can be compromised just by the act of moving through the form. And that there's loads more practice I can do to keep the integrity of that balance and alignment in the transition between the postures. So even in just those first few moments, I get much richer information about what's going on using that process. Okay. You okay, Kate?
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
I've always found that first bit really hard anyway.
Yeah.
Just the bit of, it always feels as if I'm just using muscles anyway. I never seem to be able to quite.
Yeah.
I find that the hardest bit of the form.
Yeah. Was the image of the lift going down or the elevator going down any use to you?
No, terrified of lifts, so.
Sorry. Yeah. So perhaps then just work with the earth softening underneath your feet to get that idea of continual release, rather than the elevator or the lift. Oh dear. So there's two aspects then of the way we're using our mind then. The first one is this idea of continual release. And we use something to initiate that, which is often something like imagery. And so either the ground, in this case, either the ground softening underneath, or you're in a lift, or whatever it is. But in this system, it's really important that you use that to initiate changes in the body. Then you don't continue with that imagery. You use it, something starts to happen, you relate directly to what's happening in the body. Direct perception. This is quite an important distinction. This is to be contrasted with visualization techniques, where you continually putting an image or a color or a sound or something or some aspect into the body, you impose it on the body as a form of meditation. You're not doing that here. You're using something to start the motor, to start the engine, and then you just allow the engine to run. If you continually engage the starter motor in this system, then it leads to all sorts of problems. And in particular, it obscures what you might manifest. So you're setting up the conditions, you're allowing things to unfold, and you're observing what's unfolds. You're not observing a system on your body. You're not observing, you're not imposing an imagery or anything like that. So this is quite important, and the way the system is put together. Is that okay? Yeah, good. Alrighty. So what we could do is, before we move on to the pelvis, I just want to touch the third quality, the way we use our mind in this system. And we can do this with the feet, but we actually do it with all the different constellations through the body. So this is a good time to introduce it. And this is the idea that you cultivate the opposites simultaneously. So what I'd like to do now is to invite you to go back into that standing meditation posture, and then we'll change it slightly more. So go back into your standing posture. Set up that center line suspended from the top of the head, that point above the head. Soft aspects of the body being allowed to sink downwards. The skeletal structure maintains its integrity. Take your mind down to the feet. Identify the stars of the feet, the bubbling well, the ankle areas. Allow them to communicate via the constellation. The ground underneath the feet is continually softening. And now you have the idea that the bubbling well points sink further down, and the ankle stars have an upward energy. So it's the idea that the bubbling wells sink down, the ankle areas rise up as a consequence, but in fact the whole foot is still sinking down. It just feels like you preferentially sink the bubbling well compared with the ankle areas. As you do that, put your mind right into the center of the ankle joint and feel that ankle joint opening. So feel that the ankle joint can open as a consequence of the bubbling well area sinking down a little more, which allows an upward rising energy in the stars around the ankle. In actual fact, everything is continually to sink down. It's just that you have that quality of cultivating the opposites in your mind. Play with that idea, see if you can discover that feeling of the ankle gate opening. And then again, if the standing practice becomes a little too strenuous, you can sit down. You can attempt the same thing, sitting down, but a little more difficult, I think, because you don't have that clarity of weight to inform you. So it's more subtle. The information you're seeking to pick up is more subtle, but nevertheless you can still go through that process and procedure. So just try to pick up that same feeling sitting down. Then when you're ready, just gently let go of that exercise. And again, remembering your experiences before you fully come out of the exercise, so that you can recreate that when you need to. Any observations and comments that you'd like to share, then please do so. I've got an opportunity.
If anything, these gates seem to close up.
They close up.
Yeah, I felt them.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of where you're meant to feel the gates, it just felt as if it was really tight,
Mm-hmm.
rather than. There was a second when it felt slightly open, but most of the time it was like.
Yeah. And did one side feel different from the other, Kate, or was it the same on both sides?
Seemed to be the same feeling on both sides, like I was sort of holding in.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's good. Well, that's a good observation. So did people get the idea of what I was trying to explain? So this idea of cultivating the opposites, and we're exploring that in opening this gate, the ankle gate, in this constellation. Did that make sense, at least conceptually?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't, because at the moment instead of opening up, it was like immediately pulled on.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, when you said about the initially about the bubbling well sinking down further than the ankles at first,
Mhm.
I began to feel like I had a pair of high heels on,
Yes, yes.
and so that
Not
was
that
quite
I've ever
interesting.
worn high heels, but yeah.
How do you know? Yeah, so then that sort of made me aware of making sure I didn't pull up on the ankle area.
Yeah,
Then you said that everything is still sinking down, and it all kind of went down, but it still felt like the bubbling well was a little bit lower than the ankle and heel area.
yeah. That's exactly how you open energetically the ankle gate. So that's good. Yeah. Thank you. I think for me, because through this process you start to capture consciously a lot of the information which is subconscious, then the difficulties around your ankles and the joints and that really start to become very clear. I certainly feel that in myself. I realise how much there is. The issues that I have around those, that both physically, and I also, when I observe what's happening, there's also emotional overlay on it as well. I notice there's an emotional aspect and resistance to it. So you do start to pick up much more refined information, and some of it's sometimes is not too pleasant, because you have a greater realization of what's happening, and that's part of the process. It's not that you're going backwards in your practice, it's actually that you're going forwards, and you're going forwards because you have a much more clear view. You've got much more detailed information as to what's happening with your body, and that's the basis for accelerated change. So that's the basis for really starting to move forward if you practice with this system in this way. How are you, John?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, okay. So what I'd suggest, if you're able to work with those that during the week, then that would be great. Again, you don't have to be doing it standing up, although I think it's easier to initiate standing up, but you can sit down as long as you've got a good firm chair, and your posture is good within that chair, so you can use that. But just to get our familiarity with the process of the constellation of the stars in the feet, and the two principles of continual release, and in particular, well, the three principles actually. There's the continual release. There is the, once you have the image, letting go of the image and relating directly to the effect. So direct perception of what's going on, rather than an overlay of an imagery or a system or a concept. You're looking for direct perception. And then this third aspect of the mind, which is of cultivating the opposites simultaneously. And so in terms of the constellations of the feet, we use that to open up the ankle gate. And we use it also in a similar way to open up the gates and the energy centers in the pelvis. So, and that's where we'll go next. So anything just to add from anybody on that little section? So that's kind of the outline of how we're going to work with the feet, and then now we're going to move on to working with the pelvis. Everybody good? Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the pelvis, and let's talk about where the stars are in the pelvis. So let's use Mr. Bowen. I'll introduce Mr. Bowen again. If you've not already seen him, I think everybody's seen him now. Fresh from Abergavenny. So the stars around the pelvis area, so where the you're actually getting a lot of information about the state of the pelvis, are in this area here between the joint and the this part of the skeletal structure. So I'm hoping you can see that okay. We'll feel it directly ourselves. So those front 2 points there, and then from the rear, there's a point just under the sitting bones, and again, as it goes, as the structure goes into the bones there. So you're looking to get information from those two areas, just below the sitting bones, when the ligaments and the fascia, as it starts to connect through to the top of the leg there. And on the front is these two areas here. Sort of, sorry, round there like that. If you have the ebook which I produced, then it's got it with a lot of clarity, but hopefully that was okay. Thank you, Mr. Bowens. Get back for the moment. He won't go back. There we go. So let's go into our standing posture again. Create that alignment from the top, above the top of the head, down through the perineum. Allow the foot constellations to start communicating across the diagonals as well as between each feet. And now it's actually quite important that you don't allow the body to sink. So you really do need this feeling of suspension, because you're trying to create the space to make a change in the nature of the pelvis. And in particular, you're going to have the idea that the sitting bones can just relax downwards towards the heels. And as a consequence, and at the same time, this area, which I pointed out, starts to have an upward quality to it. So this is cultivating two opposite qualities at the same time. It feels like the sitting bones can just continually relax down towards the feet, towards the heels, and the area in the front of the pelvis, that structure here is continually relaxing upwards. It's not pulling upwards, it's relaxing upwards. You're relaxing down at the back and you're relaxing upwards at the front. And as a consequence of that, the pelvis might change angles slightly and the lower lumbar area might start to open. So see if you can get that feeling then of those two qualities at the same time. The area just under the sitting bones, relaxing downwards. That area in front of the hips in the groin area, just relaxing upwards, cultivating at the same time. And again, it helps if you don't bend the knees, but that you're suspended from a point above the head to give you the space in the body so that the pelvis can make those adjustments. And again, we'll stand in that position for just a couple of minutes. So establish your center line, establish the feet stars. Now work with the pairs of stars in the pelvis to feel the change in the angle of the pelvis and the change in the quality of the lumbar spine. Feeling with continual release in both directions, continual release under the sitting bones, continual release upwards at the front of the pelvis. Then again, without disturbing that feeling, see if you can take that into the sitting practice as well. Continue, release downwards through the sitting bone area. Continue to release upwards at the front. Feeling a change in the lumbar vertebrae as you do so. And then gently let go of that meditation. Give you a little bit more information, and then we'll go back into it, I think. So I talked about feeling the change in the lumbar area, and I'll use Mr. Bowen's again. So we're particularly interested in that area there. Can you, I'm not sure if you can see, but that joint at the lumbar, if I take his hands out of the way. Can you see that lumbar joint which looks slightly more closed, which is that one? Can you see that? Yeah. So can you see this idea that if there's a continual release of the sitting bones down and a continued upward energy, then that will lead to a change in the orientation slightly of the hip, and that will start to open that area there around that joint. And so that is the Ming Men point, which is identified in Taoist practices as a particular energy gate, one of the key energy gates of the spine to open. So when we feel that change in the lumbar area, we're in particular looking for feeling that change around there, that area there. You don't have to be too precise, you know, you can feel it in that lower lumbar area, but that's the point we're looking for. So let's, with that bit of information, then let's just go back into that meditation and just feel if you can, see if you can feel that point. So I don't mind if you do that sitting down or standing, whichever's easiest for you. If you're starting to get a sensation of that lumbar area opening, see if you can identify something which starts to happen quite naturally. And that is, there seems to be a correspondence or a line from a point which is a few fingers below the belly button, straight through the center of the body towards that Ming Meng point, towards that point. It feels almost like there's a slight inward connection or a slight pressure almost between that front point of the body and the Ming Meng. If that's not identifying itself to you, don't worry about it. Just have the idea that it might be there, but just go back to the fundamental way of using the stars of the pelvis, which is the continued relaxation of that area under the sitting bone towards the feet, and that continual release upwards at the front of the pelvis, which when combined suspended from the top of the back of the head, gives you the space in the lumbar area to start to change the quality of the lumbar area and the Ming Meng point in particular. Okay, and then gradually remember the sensations, the feelings you have as you come out of that exercise. And again, there's a chance for any observations or comments you'd like to share. Or questions.
So I felt like sometimes I was physically forcing it with trying to do it using the muscles, and sometimes I was sort of achieving it by relaxing. And obviously there's a different feeling from the two. But I was hovering between the two.
So when you say muscle, sometimes you felt muscles, John, in any area? Or?
Well, yeah, so I felt like I was doing it, forcing it.
Yeah. So something about relaxing the focus around it, and just having the intent to set up the conditions, relaxing the focus, so it's not that you continually continually imposing that. That's a bit like continually having the starter motor on. So you set up the conditions, you relax out from that to just generally observe, and you might need to go back at some point to restart the engine, but it's not something that is imposed upon it. It's this goes back to this idea of not using a strong image throughout the meditation. You're just looking to observe.
I felt at one point I needed to slightly draw back the tip of my sternum to allow the lumbar to release more. It was just, I felt a bit kind of a little bit like I was a bit saggy in the upper body.
Yeah.
And I just got a little insight to slightly adjust that tip of the sternum backwards.
Yeah.
And things came into a more alert alignment, and the back could just open a little bit more.
That's really good observation, Jan, and it's exactly how we start to work with the solar plexus, which is the next level. So all these things are connected, and in a sense it's a bit artificial trying to break it down like this, but that adjustment is exactly what we do in the next level, working with the solar plexus energy. So thank you, good insight. Yeah. So we have there actually most of the conditions that you need to allow the Dantian to activate and start its processes automatically. So the idea of the cultivating the opposites to change the nature of the pelvis and the lumbar and the main point, the idea of when you breathe the perineum slightly lifts, and the observation that the front is connected through to the Ming draws your mind naturally towards the center to first locate by direct perception the Dantian, but it also starts to push to build the container which the Dantian can start to develop in. So you have a slight upward from the perineum, you have the opening of the Ming from the back, you have this natural compression from the front, and the only element which is missing from that is the diaphragmatic breathing, which compresses the Dantian, and then you've got a container, a three-dimensional container into which the Dantian starts its processes. We have enough there for you with practice to start feeling the Dantian building its energy around the body. So once again, this is a very refined way of very rapidly, directly perceiving and initiating the energy around the Dantian, or just increasing the energy, because we've all got energy everywhere, of course, but increasing up its level of function is probably a more accurate statement. And, yeah, so there we go. Does that make sense? Is that interesting?
Yeah.
And again, it's something we can do between standing and sitting. And what's quite interesting in energetic or chi, from a chi point of view, is that we often lose energy when we move from one activity to another. So if we're continually chopping and changing, then that can be a loss of energy. And in particular, when we sit or stand, we can lose energy. But if we have a continuity, such as the foot constellation, such as the pelvic constellation, then which is maintained through those transitions of activity, you won't lose energy so much during the day. So if you find yourself being very tired, then as the day goes on, then try that technique for maintaining a continuity between switching from one practice to another, or from one posture, one activity to another activity. Any last observations or questions or observations? Okay, so do try to practice during the week. We build from the feet upwards, so your foundation is the foot constellation, the central alignment, and then start working on top of that with the pelvic constellation. And yeah, and then next week it would be interesting to see any further experiences which may have developed over the course of the week. So we'll leave it there then.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you. Bye,
Have a
everyone.
have a great week.
See you next week.
Yeah, bye.